Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting from Springfield on this Sunday, December 6th. Capital Connection usually airs from the Capitol, but like many of you have already done this year, today I'm working from home out of an abundance of caution. I'm okay. I did have some mild symptoms, so I got tested, but according to CDC guidelines, I'll be working from home in isolation until those test results come back. And I imagine many of you already watch this program from your living room, so today I'll join you from mine. The federal corruption case against Speaker Michael Madigan entered a new phase this week as 4 defendants in that case, former executives and lobbyists with ComEd, officially entered pleas of not guilty, appearing virtually instead of in court in person. But all 4 of them, Jay Doherty, John Hooker, Ann Pramajor, and Mike McLean, Speaker Madigan's closest confidant, told a judge in court they're not guilty of the 8-year-long corruption scheme the feds are trying to build, even after ComEd already admitted to its role in the scheme, and former executive Fidel Marquez entered a plea of guilty. He's cooperating with the feds. Speaker Michael Madigan, or Public Official A in the charging documents, did not issue a new statement after Wednesday's arraignment, but he has in the past said he didn't know about the attempted bribes, that he didn't want any of that undue influence, and that he would never have approved of it if he did know. Those denials did very little to slow the growing calls for him to resign, including from House Republican leader Jim Durkin.
Speaker Madigan cannot, under any circumstance, continue to serve in the House of Representatives as Speaker of the House. I am asking for Speaker Madigan's resignation today, and do what's right for the people of the state of Illinois and resign your office.
That was earlier this week. Speaker Madigan says he has no plans to step down. He didn't issue any statement responding to Leader Durkin or to any of the other 19 Democrats who have said he should not be Speaker, but says he intends to be a candidate for that position in January. Before any of the feds brought their indictments against Madigan's inner circle, before they brought indictments against State Senator Martin Sandoval, or any of the other indictments in the recent corruption case, there was one campaign operative, one campaign consultant who worked in the 13th Ward for Speaker Madigan who brought a different kind of accusation, those charges of sexual harassment against one of Speaker Madigan's political operatives. She joins us now, Alaina Hampton, the first time appearing with us here since you first brought those accusations and made them public back in November 2018, more than 2 years ago now. It seems it couldn't have possibly been that long ago. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I do want to point to the connection here between your story and what we now know about Speaker Madigan's circle and really how it works, the loyalty factor that seems to drive so many of his relationships between lobbyists and between political workers. I think your perspective here might be interesting. You recently had an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune and detailed what the last 2 years have been like for you, but I want to single out one quote you made and then ask you to elaborate on it. It was referring to the checks that Mike McLean went to these different lobbyists that were on the payroll at ComEd. And he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but can you help our guy out? Our guy being Kevin Quinn, the man who harassed you. And he wrote to Kevin Quinn, quote, "These men are sticking their necks out, knowing full well if it goes public before you are exonerated, they will get the full blast from the Me Too movement. So please honor the confidentiality." What did you see in that message?
I saw what exactly happens with Madigan's organizations and the people that work, his loyalists, essentially. It was not shocking to me that checks were being lined up for Kevin Quinn after he was fired. That is essentially how people in that organization and close friends of his operate. It was disappointing. I actually found out about that literally the day after I verbally agreed to settle the lawsuit, and it made me question my decision. But ultimately, I knew that the federal investigation was going on, and decided to settle the lawsuit anyway.
And some people look at this and wonder what the connection is. Do you think there's a direct link between you bringing your charges public and what the feds know now? In other words, did you coming forward help open a door for prosecutors to make their case?
I don't really have any way of knowing that, but Kevin Quinn has been raided by the FBI, and Mike McLean has obviously been indicted now. It's obvious that uh, if Kevin hadn't been fired, those checks wouldn't have been lined up for him, and he was fired because my story was going public.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of this. You work in Democratic campaigns, a political consultant, and so watching your perspective as someone who's come forward against the most powerful politician in Illinois and his operation, and then sort of watching your story evolve has been fascinating to see. You can follow her on Twitter to see more of her thoughts here. But when you were there before coming forward, did you just understand that that was the currency, or that was the culture of the speaker's operation, that he was going to take care of all of his people, only a few of them? What was the dynamic?
Yeah, it was a known fact on the inside that if you put in a lot of hard work and you're very loyal, that someone within the organization and the administration would help set you up with a job in some type of government role, lobbying, whatever. In fact, I actually ended up with one of those roles. They placed me in a job in the south suburbs at one point in my career.
And so was this perceived or known, assumed to be a reward for good campaign work, or what was the incentive?
That is the incentive. It is for good campaign work. But when you're given, I shouldn't say given, but when you're placed in a position like the job I had in Chicago Heights, the expectation is that you continue to do political campaign work for the organization on the side. So there is that level of expectation.
The feds are bringing their case saying it was this for that, the quid pro quo of giving favors for Speaker Madigan's people in exchange for passing legislation as a public official. But the way you describe it almost makes you wonder if there could be a separate campaign finance violation, that this was sort of a under the table benefit to keep campaign workers working, or paying them in a way that wasn't reported.
Yeah, I definitely could see a campaign finance violation. I don't know which direction the feds are taking the investigation, though. I know their main interest is ComEd. So I don't know if they've actually looked into the other jobs, like for instance, where I was placed in it was actually a nonprofit position in Chicago Heights. I'm sure they're still piecing together all of the many arms that Madigan's organization has throughout the state of Illinois.
It's very interesting to hear your commentary as well, or your perspective on how you were treated, shunned, or ignored by most of the Democratic House members after coming forward against the Speaker. The political winds have shifted quite a bit over the last 2 years. What do you think took so long, and what was that like for you? I understand that many of these people were people that you knew and looked up to.
Yes. It was disappointing, but unsurprising. I've obviously worked with a lot of state representatives throughout my career. I worked for the Democratic Party of Illinois for on and off for 5 years. I think a lot of the elected officials lack courage, and I know there's a lot of fear mongering within that organization, and ultimately what it comes down to is that many of these elected officials fear losing finances for their campaigns for winning re-election. Many of them don't know how to fundraise on their own without Madigan and his organization directing funds to their campaigns.
That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, as House Democrats evaluate who might be their next speaker, if in fact they deny Speaker Madigan the gavel. In conversations with them, many of them aren't sure who among them is the strongest fundraiser, because they haven't had to do much of it.
Right. What I think it comes down to, if Speaker Madigan doesn't end up being speaker, I think the next chosen person will be a person that shows strong fundraising skills.
That's interesting. When you look at that, I wonder, you've talked about I think you've even alluded to this before, people asking you about your own future. You've advised and consulted campaigns. You've seen candidates. Have you ever considered jumping in, running for office? You talk about this, one of the most important attributes of a candidate being courage. I imagine it took some measure of that courage to come forward against your employer and your harasser and Speaker Madigan's operation. Do you think you have what it takes to run for public office?
Do I have what it takes? Yes, I do, but I don't really have the aspiration to run for public office. It's not really something I've ever seen myself doing. I would do it if the timing were right and I felt like I were the best person for the position. However, I've lived in Chicago for a while and my roots are in Central Illinois. So for me, it would come down to the community that I feel most connected to.
I just had to ask because I've seen you sort of allude to that or people ask you about it. And I was curious if maybe you've looked at that and wondered, what would you say right now? We know there are 19 House Democrats who have come out and said they're not going to vote for Speaker Madigan. What do you say to the rest of them, the ones who have not brought themselves to say that yet?
I would say have courage. And, the residents of Illinois have been screaming that they're unhappy with Madigan's position in the state of Illinois. And I think it's important that they listen to their actual voters. Politics isn't supposed to be about maintaining power and having the most money. It's about representing the people that vote for you. And it's their obligation to honor that.
As we move forward, what do you want to see in the next leader of the Illinois House? What should there be a changing of the guard that takes it in a different direction? There's some talk that there might be somebody who's close to the speaker who could just be next in line. What would you most like to see there?
I would most like to see someone that's independent, someone that actually listens to the residents of Illinois, because at the end of the day, their job is to represent the people in the state and not just people that are elected officials and have special interests.
All right. An interesting conversation with Alaina Hampton more than 2 years after she first came forward with charges of sexual harassment. We've now seen how that has played out. Speaker Madigan farther and farther under siege. Any predictions before we let you go on whether or not Speaker Madigan remains Speaker after January of 2021?
I'm not sure what will happen, but as of right now, it does not seem like he has a path to winning re-election.
Not without flipping some of those hard no votes back into the yes column, that's for sure. Alaina, thank you for joining us. When we come back, Senator Tom Cullerton, he's under federal indictment, says he didn't do it. He's also leading a new investigative hearing into an outbreak of coronavirus at the LaSalle Veterans Home. That's next.